Now let's try to apply Mendel's law of independent assortment. This one definitely gets a lot more complicated, but we don't need to make it any harder than it is. We're only going to use this if we have more than one trait. So in this case, I'm going to look at flower color and height. So the A genes are for flower color, B genes are for height. So obviously, back to the law of segregation and kind of what Mendel established, you get 2 copies of every gene. So you have 2 alleles, 2 for flower color, 2 for height, but you're only going to pass on 1 of each. Maybe that's the dominant for flower color and the recessive for height, or some other combination. But you can see where this is going. It's going to be a lot more complicated to figure out what gets passed on to the next generation. There's 2 general approaches we can use, but first I want to go back to kind of standard methods. One being to make a legend. So let's start there. All right, so I've sketched out a quick legend, which just helps us keep things organized, keep our head straight so we don't get confused. Quick bit on probabilities, because that's all this is. Our big question is, which A gene are we going to pass on? Which of those flower color ones? Which height gene are we going to pass on? Well, there's 2 possibilities here, so it's really like the flip of a coin, right? Do we get heads or tails? And the same is true for this one. And since these 2 work independent of each other because they travel on different chromosomes, then as Mendel figured out, the A gene gets passed on like the flip of one coin, and the B gene gets passed on, I can't flip it with my left hand, but gets passed on separately like the flip of a separate coin. So let's treat these 2 as independent things. All right, well, what I also need is a genotype and a question. So let's get to that. All right, well, we're going to take on the most complicated version of this we can with heterozygous individuals for both. All right, both genes and both parents are completely heterozygous. And we're asking the chances of getting a purple flowered tall offspring. That's pretty specific, but that's a unique combination. But it has to have both purple flowers and tall. Kind of like saying in that other analogy, getting heads twice, or head and tails. So I've written up the genotypes of both parents here. This parent's going to pass on an A and a B gene, and this one's going to pass on 1 of each as well. The offspring better have 2 A alleles and 2 B alleles, right? So if I just passed on the first of everything, then I'd get 2 dominant flower color alleles and 2 dominant height genes. Looking at the legend here, that means they would be purple and tall. All right, well, there's one combination that gives us purple and tall, but there's more to it than that, obviously. The easiest way to sort this one out is just to make 2 separate Punnett squares. One for purple, or one for flower color, and one for height. So let's try that. All right, so you can see I've worked out 2 separate Punnett squares. One for the A genes, that's the flower color, one for the B genes, which is the height. And our question is, chance of getting purple flowers and tall. So both of those together, they both have to happen. Well, of these over here, that one's purple, and that one's purple. We can refer back to the legend to help us there. But that's 75%, or as a probability, 0.75. All right, so that takes care of the purple, but it also has to be tall. And so we got, these are tall, that one's tall, again, 0.75. So what's the probability of both of those things occurring together? For that, we just multiply those together. So you get something like 0.5625. You can convert that to a percentage if you wanted, or it could be a fraction. depending on how it's asked to be reported. But just multiplying the probabilities of each gives you the probability or the chance of getting something that is purple and tall. What if I were asking about purple and short instead of purple and tall? I have everything set up. I don't need to change anything, just need to do some new figuring with numbers. Let's do it in fractions this time, just for something different. Purple is the same, right? That is 0.75, or as a fraction, 3/4. What about short? Well, really only one of those fits the bill now. So that is 1 in 4. All right, the probability of getting both of those, 3/4 times 1/4, or 3/16, something like 19%. Seems pretty reasonable. There's another way to figure this one out as well, and that's to combine all of these into one big Punnett square. Takes a little more care. There's more possibilities, in my opinion, for errors, and you'll see why in a minute. But let's go ahead and work through that one, because you see it a lot. For calculating probabilities, this is probably the better one. But if you need to know something like ratios, like phenotypic ratios, what are all the unique phenotypes that you could get, like purple and tall, or purple and short, and white and tall, and white and short, what are the ratios of those? The second method is probably superior for figuring that one out. All right, so a lot bigger Punnett square here. I had to erase all the rest of this stuff, but let's go after the same question. What are the chances with the same genotype of getting purple flowered and tall offspring? So we construct it like this. Biggest mistake I see people make is that they don't give each of the sex cells that are going to fertilize, like this would be the pollen, it's going to fertilize an ovule, both genes. Remember, the rule is, simple one, you have 2, you pass on 1. You have 2, you pass on 1. That means every single offspring needs an A gene and a B gene, something for flower color and height. Most common mistake I see people make is they take this and say 4 letters, 4 boxes. There we go. But that doesn't do it. You're going to get offspring without enough alleles. So let me go ahead and do this properly. I'm going to fill the whole thing out. Same process as before. Usually people don't have trouble filling it out. So I'm going to do that, and we'll come back and analyze it. Well, there we go. Impressive, isn't that? Yeah, it takes a lot of time. I color-coded it along the way to make a few things easier to see. So we were after the question purple flowered and tall. So that means they had to have a dominant A and a dominant B, and that's everything here in green. And so in this 4x4 matrix, 9 of those out of the 16 have both dominant alleles. And so that's the 56%. So we could have got the same answer, but this is, to be honest, a lot more work and a lot more chance for error than the other one if that's all we were after. But if we needed a ratio, let's say, of all the different phenotypes as I suggested before, well, there I have 9 of those that are purple and tall, and then I have 3 of them, that's the ones in red, that are purple and dwarf, and then another 3 that are white flowered and tall, and then only this one down here that's recessive for each. So white flowered and dwarf. That'd be the phenotypic ratio, the ratio of all the different unique phenotypes. And don't miss this. This is the big biological concept here. Different combinations. Mentioned it in the previous video. You are a unique combination of your parents. And you're different than your siblings because all that shuffling getting passed on to the next generation creates a unique individual. And this is just for 2 traits, right? You have 20,000 genes. Think about the matrix that would make. No wonder you don't look like your siblings. These problems don't always have to be that difficult. Don't make them any harder than you need to. Let me demonstrate that here. Answer the question, what percent of the offspring from this cross would be both purple flowered and tall? One, if you just stop and think about it for a minute and analyze the genotypes, then you might be able to figure it out without even touching a Punnett square. But we'll also do it with the Punnett square, but a really abbreviated one. So here's how we do it without. This parent is homozygous dominant. It has all dominant alleles, which means all offspring, no matter what, are going to get the purple flowered allele. At least one. So they're all going to be purple flowered. Well, you probably guessed where I was going next. Right there. Yeah. That means they're all going to be, what, tall or short? Yeah, they're all going to be tall. They all get a dominant allele. So the answer to this one, all of them. All right. Well, let's say you don't trust yourself on that one quite enough. Could we do a simpler Punnett square? Absolutely. Punnett square is a tool to be used. Don't be used by the Punnett square. We don't need to draw a big matrix up here. It'll be so small I don't even have to erase this one, because we're just looking for unique combinations. So what unique gametes could this individual produce? One. Only one, right? It could only pass on a dominant A gene and a recessive B gene. Any other combination is just a repetition of that. We could do that 4 times if we wanted to do the full Punnett square, that 4x4 matrix, but we don't need to. There's only one possibility here times one unique allele there. That's it. What about this one? Well, this one has 2 unique alleles for the A1 and only one here. So I'm expecting 2 different combinations here. So for that one, I get the dominant A and a dominant B, or the recessive A and a dominant B. That's it. That's the only unique alleles that each of them could produce. There's my Punnett square, the whole thing. If you were to fill this in, easy enough, a whole lot easier and less prone to error than doing the whole 4x4 matrix, you'd come up with the same answer, that all of them would have at least one dominant allele for each. And so 100% of them would be purple flowered and tall. So that's it for applying the independent assortment law that Mendel came up with. Genetics problems are usually pretty fun. Students usually enjoy them, but they do get frustrating if you make too much of them. Just go back to the core principles. 2 alleles, you pass on 1. Know the genotypes of the parents, then you can figure out the genotypes of the offspring, and from there you can answer just about any question that you are asked. But don't make it any more complicated than it needs to be. Good luck.